All right, we're going to try this again. Welcome into starting five. I am checking the comments here. Let me know if you hear me because I just talked by myself for 10 minutes. And as I told Manny on the last one, you may not even be hearing this. Manny, are you hearing this? You're hearing this, right? Okay, like you were hearing me the last time? All right, you can hear me. This is terrific. All right, we'll get started here. I don't know what was going on there. I actually was seeing the little green dots go. The microphone was on and all that. I don't know why. I just need to reset my computer. All right, so welcome back to starting five. And since we stopped the last one, there's actually been news drops, so there's something to actually talk about now. All right, we're sponsored here by our friends over at U Break Wheel Fix. You can find them at ubreakwheelfix.com or ubreakwheelfix on Instagram. 305-748-0112. That's 305-748-0112. They do the powder coating, they do the refinishing, they do everything for you. They can fix your wheels if you need that. They've moved to a bigger spot because they have so many people that want to go see them, and especially because they want to use the deal, which is 5.5% off if you mention 5 reasons. Check out Mark and his entire team over at U Break Wheel Fix. Again, that's with a U at the start. And again, that is on Northeast 143rd Street in North Miami. Also check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5. FIVE, put down $5. You get $50 to play right away. PrizePicks.com, our daily fantasy partner, which is legal in the state of Florida. Make sure that you use the Bam Adebayo over assist prop. I've won on that 8 straight times. 8 straight times. The Bam assist prop. All right, let's get to it. So what I was talking about for 8 minutes to myself, we appreciate everybody in the comments here. I'm checking out the comments. I can see that you guys can hear me, Brom. Yes, my audio is awake. I was awake too. I don't know what was going on there. That time was not actually my fault, which is a surprise. I was talking about the fact that the Heat have gone through this stretch of schedule and it's gone much better than expected. I had them at 1-5 during a 6-game stretch, and not only are they 3-1, losing to the Celtics, but having beaten the Lakers, the Cavs, and also the Suns. Of course, the Suns didn't have Durant, just like Dallas didn't have Luka, just like Philly didn't have Embiid, but still, a win's a win. And they played very well against Cleveland. They capitalized on the fact that my guess is the Cavs were out all night, because when you come from Cleveland, you don't handle the December nightlife in Miami all that well, particularly when it's Art Basel week. But one way or another, the Heat got a win. They outplayed the Cavaliers throughout. Hero outplayed Mitchell and Garland. Terrific. Okay, now you've added these 2 games into the schedule that you didn't expect to have, which were Toronto and Detroit. You've got which are 2 winnable games. You got some time off. Now Orlando has lost Franz after they're still trying to get Paolo back. So that game, which comes up after the Toronto, Detroit, and then OKC games, doesn't look as difficult as it looked before. And so all of this is trending the right direction for the Heat, especially because it looks like Eric Spoelstra, after struggling early in the season, not just with the timeout, but also that cost them a game, but also trying to find a rotation here and starting a starting lineup that we thought he would start to start the season, but we didn't necessarily think would work, particularly the Rozier Hero part of it. He has found a starting lineup that is now the best starting lineup in the league based on the metrics in a small sample size, because you have Duncan, who basically unlocks them offensively, and Haywood, who takes care of the dirty work defensively, and Drew Smith, who's going to join us on 5 on the Floor at some point this week, who has given them a dirty work player when Haywood is not on the floor. So even when Larson comes back, I think Drew's going to get minutes, and I'll be curious to see what happens with the Hawkins and Rozier minutes. But none of you want to talk about that now, because Shams just came out with a report that Jimmy's opting out this summer. Okay, now we just did a podcast on this, and we made projections. And I said before the season, or actually on the day that Riley made his comments about Jimmy wanting to be more available, that no matter what Jimmy's camp said publicly, privately, they weren't happy with Pat's comments. And the feeling was that Jimmy was going to basically, do what is his right to do, but also going to be seen as a bit of a spiteful thing, which is to say, okay, well, then I'm not coming back. And so at first, I thought opt out was the likely scenario. Okay, that's what I was going into the season with, that he would opt out, that he might walk for free, and that essentially, this season was going to be kind of a sort of a litmus test on the Heat to see, will you give up on a build? Like, will you trade him before he leaves you? Okay, so that's what I went into the season with. Okay, that he would opt out and say, hey, thanks for the memories, and you're out. Okay, and he's out. Well, then as the season started, though, I started to trend a different direction. Okay, even though there was the Shams report, and look, unless they're playing it off, Jimmy's agent Bernie Lee acts like he doesn't like Shams, at least not publicly. So I didn't think the Shams report necessarily came from Jimmy's camp, but there was that report on draft night, which was, by the way, the same night that Bam signed his extension that said that Jimmy was going to opt out and not come back. Okay. But as the season started and as Jimmy started to miss time and wasn't like playing dynamically, okay, particularly in the first half of games, and the team was becoming more and more Tyler's from an offensive perspective, I started to lean a little bit to Jimmy opting in. Because, if you're going to opt out, you have to know that you're going to get more than the $52 million that he's due next year, or $54 million. And so that's where I've been heading. And Alex and I did a podcast where we kind of evaluated the three options, right? Jimmy opting in, Jimmy opting out, or the Heat trading him before he has the chance to do it, at least while he's on a Miami roster. And I said that I don't think any of these percentages is higher than 40, but that the most likely to me would be opting in. The next most likely is him opting out. And then the next most likely is them actually making a trade, although I thought that they would evaluate it, take calls, and all that. Now, what Shams is basically saying, and I haven't had a chance to read the entire full report, okay, is that the lean is still where it was this summer. That where I came to this season, that I've gone too far with this, at least based on what they're saying, okay, which is that the lean is still that Jimmy is going to opt out. And if Jimmy is going to opt out, then the rest of the report makes sense, because if he's going to opt out, you can't just let him walk for nothing. I mean, that's where I'm at with it. And so this doesn't have to be an ugly situation, but they have to explore their options. And Alex and I went through the list of teams that could be interested in him. And I do think that the Heat could create a market for him. There's a very specific type of team that would want Jimmy Butler's services at this point, especially because that team has to decide whether or not they're going to extend him. Okay. So I look at the Eastern Conference and I say, all right, who would want him in the East, and would the Heat actually trade him inside the East? And I only come up with a couple of teams in the East that would make any sense. I know people are going to mention Tibbs in New York. I don't think Jimmy's going to play with Karl Anthony Towns. Okay. Plus, if you look at the Knicks contract structure, I don't really think it's feasible at this point. Orlando is a team that I've thrown out there as a possibility. And then Alex mentioned the Nets. The Nets have come up before. Big market. Jimmy's starting a coffee business. He's been in a lot of commercials. Wouldn't be the worst thing to be on the New York platform, even if it is Brooklyn, not the city. But the Nets have a lot of, well, it is a city, but you know what I mean. It's not Manhattan. And the Nets have a ton of space. Okay, they could create close to $60 to $70 million worth of space. I mean, that goes quickly in the modern era, but still, it gives them a lot of flexibility. My thought is Brooklyn would be more likely as a team to dump salary to, not necessarily a team to take Jimmy. I'm looking out west. Okay, so the teams that Shams is mentioning are some of the teams that we've talked about a lot. All right. One team is Houston. Houston has made it clear publicly that they're not going to give up their young core. I don't believe them. They were not expected to contend this quickly. They have, in my view, the most interesting young pieces that are movable but would not kill their chances of success. I don't think they're going to trade Şengün. I don't necessarily think they're going to trade Green at this time, but I think that Jabari Smith is someone who could be had. They have contracts that can match. They're a team that I would look at. My most likely team all along through this process, if he is traded, is Golden State. And the reason for that is they will do right by Steph Curry. And you've already started to hear the buzz about how they're going to get Steph another star, get him help. They've put Kuminga in the starting lineup, put Draymond on the bench. If anybody believes that Draymond on the bench is a permanent thing, I got a bridge to sell you. I don't think it is. I think they're showcasing Kuminga. They're seeing what it looks like with him there. They also have pods. They've got Wiggins' contract, which is a movable contract at this time. Wiggins is shooting 43% from three. Yes, I think he's 30 years old at this point. But the contract doesn't look awful anymore. To me, it's kind of a neutral contract. And it could probably be moved somewhere else if Miami didn't want it. So I think Golden State, to me, is still the most likely option. I think Kerr would take Jimmy on, feel comfortable with that. So that to me is a team I would look at. I would look at Memphis. Desmond Bain to me is the prize to get, but I don't know if you could get him. But Memphis looks like they have Ja back this year. They're back up towards the top of the Western Conference. There's a lot of teams in the West that are like one star away from separating themselves, not necessarily from OKC, but from some of the other teams in that pack. I would look at Denver. I think Denver's a possibility. Jokic has no help. He's never complained for help really until recently when he's kind of been calling out his teammates a little bit. I just don't know what exactly you would want from Denver. Okay. But again, they're a team I could see making a pitch. I think the Clippers could make a run. They have been better than expected. They haven't really missed Paul George. Norm Powell's been tremendous. And Kawhi supposedly is coming back. I don't know how long that lasts, but Kawhi has wanted to play with Jimmy before. Ballmer has deep pockets. Ballmer might actually extend Jimmy. I also think the Warriors might extend Jimmy because, again, they could align his contract with Curry's and with Draymond's and kind of have them all kind of go off into the sunset together, and Jimmy wouldn't have to cover so much of an offensive load. So those are some of the teams I would look at. My guy George Sedano says to me he wouldn't rule out the Lakers, which is a team he covers on a regular basis. I just don't know what you would want. Can you headline a trade with Austin Reeves? That doesn't interest me very much. I think you look at the Lakers situation. LeBron loves Jimmy, always has great respect for Jimmy. And again, I think that, and we know obviously JJ Redick has a lot of respect for Jimmy. They play together, they're close. So that's another team that I would look. So you have all these teams in the West. So that is to say that if Miami wants to create a market, the time to do it is now. And that's why I think you're seeing some of these reports now. Again, the fact that they're coming through Shams, there's always an inside baseball or an inside basketball part of this, okay? Which is that you got to understand where stuff is coming from. When Woj was doing this, Woj didn't like the Heat. The Heat don't like Woj. The Heat didn't leak to Woj. I actually watched in the press room once where Woj was put up on the fourth level, which I can tell you I've never actually been at in the arena, and he did a "Don't you know who I am" thing in the middle of the Heat press room. Okay, the Heat did not leak to Woj in any way. He shares an agent with Spoelstra. He did, and so sometimes Spo would do some stuff with him. But they didn't have a relationship with Woj. It feels like they have a better relationship with Shams, but they don't necessarily leak a lot of this stuff. They don't do a lot of the market creation stuff that other teams do. I think in this case that might be necessary though, because again, you're trying to make it clear to other teams, we will move him, put your best offers on the table, let's evaluate it, let's see if it makes sense for us as opposed to just holding him until the end of the season. Okay, so those are some of the teams that I think could get involved. Again, I mentioned Houston, Golden State, Memphis, the two LA teams. I think are definite possibilities in Denver. That's where I would start. I don't think Phoenix gets involved in this. They're already outlaying too much money to stars already. The Heat's not going to get Durant out of them. Obviously, Durant has been a cause for Pat for years. I don't think that's going to happen. And Beal, the Heat have expressed no interest in Beal. They didn't want Beal when they could have had Beal. They made the right decision on that because Beal's due $57 million and has a no trade clause. And so, again, he would even have to approve the trade to go to Miami, which I don't even know if he would do. But you don't want Bradley Beal at this stage anyway. Tyler Hero is better than Bradley Beal at this stage, and he's a lot cheaper. Okay, so those are the teams that I think could get involved. I still think some of this is posturing. Okay, I still think some of it is kind of feeling it out, seeing if maybe from the Butler side whether the Heat will ultimately budge on giving Jimmy the extension. I'll ask the question in the comments here for those of you who are in, and we see some of the comments that are coming in here. Do you actually think? Do you actually think that the Heat should trade Jimmy? I mean, and the question becomes, do you think that there's actually a little bit more time on this build to try to compete in the East? I think that's what this comes down to. I don't think this team is a contending team. I think this team probably will get out of the play-in if Jimmy stays reasonably healthy this year because the West the East is not what we expected it to be because you look at some of the teams that are in the mix with Miami. I think Miami's going to pass Atlanta. I think they can stay ahead of Milwaukee. I think they might even be able to catch Orlando if the injuries keep coming in Orlando, although they've done a really good job managing those injuries. But Philadelphia not being what people expected them to be, Indiana has fallen off as I thought they might. And so Miami is in position, I think, to get out of the play-in this year with Jimmy. Is that enough for you? Let's get to some of the comments here, and as we close this out, and we'll do more on this as the day goes on. Obviously, I had mentioned on the last stream where I had no volume that we're going to have Drew Smith on the podcast this week as well, talking about the current team. Mr. Wims, I guess, or Mr. Williams, still need another power forward that's over 6'9", as well as getting Ware up to speed. I think there'll be opportunities for Ware as the season goes on. They want to see what he looks like in terms of impacting winning down at Sioux Falls. There's still a lot he's got to clean up. We kind of told you that would be the case. I think Kevin's minutes will go down and Ware's will go up as the season goes on. If Jimmy walks, how does that affect the cap moving forward? Well, I mean, you don't have to pay him. I mean, it certainly helps you from a tax perspective. I mean, you don't have to pay him the $54 million. You're not going to extend him the $58 million the year after. But it's not like it just gives them that he's replaceable in the cap because of, again, Bam's contract is still there. Tyler still has another $30 million. They'd still need to decide what to do with Terry, who's got one more year after this one at $24 million, although that's likely going to be $22.3 because he's not going to earn those other incentives. And you still have Duncan on a partial guarantee for next year. So it's not like it's just Jimmy walks, you just replace him with a free agent. Okay, this is more if you traded Jimmy, you would get picks perhaps and a young player like a Kuminga, like a Jabari Smith, that type of player. And then you essentially have the picks to possibly flip in a trade with some contract that you throw in for someone else. So in other words, could you then get picks and trade Rozier and Duncan somewhere else with those picks to get another star? And Duncan's contract will have some value because, again, it's a partial guarantee and he's not a bad player. Rozier's contract, it has to be the team for Rozier. I don't think they can recoup a first-round pick for Rozier at this stage. This comes in Benjamin Carbonell. He should only trade Jimmy if he indicates he will not resign or demands a max extension. Well, he's kind of done both, Ben. He's kind of done both. The question is whether he's serious. Jimmy, it's been said to me over and over, Jimmy's not going to accept $1 less than the max. Okay? Now, once you're in the open market, that changes because you got to sign with somebody, right? But as far as with the Heat, this is not going to be a hometown discount. Jimmy wants his money. He's entitled to ask for it. Other players have done the same thing. I mean, again, Dwayne was an exception on this, and then even Dwayne got frustrated by the end. Would you right now still offer Jimmy the extension with Miami? I would not. I think we're still headed for a 60-game season with Jimmy. I think if this build was in a different place and you felt like you could win a championship even when Jimmy was healthy, I think in the next year, I think you do offer him the extension. So I don't think it's all about him. I understand it's just one more year at $58 million that really he was asking for because you would be ripping up the option year. But my thought at the time was I probably would not, and I don't think anything has changed my mind this year. He's a very good player when he's engaged still. He's not the defender that he was. They need to lean into him less offensively. That has been the plan this year with Tyler. He is the guy who slows the game down and kind of figures out a way to get him to the finish line in a lot of these games still. Again, I still think he'd be a very effective player on a contending team, but he's not a number one at this point. And that's what Octavia says. At a certain point, you got to call it on this build. The build has been amazing, but we hit the ceiling, in my opinion. And then this one comes in from Didi on the move. Ninja 33, quite a name. Do you think Miami will actually trade Jimmy or anyone else on the team right now go out and go out 8 of these next time? In other words, if they win 8 of the next 10 games. Look, here's the thing about it. And I'll close with this, and we'll do more later. And I apologize that we're going a little short, but I did talk to myself for 8 minutes on the previous stream and didn't realize that I was muted. We'll do more of this on 5 on the Floor today. My overall feeling on it is this. The Heat are always going to lean to trying to compete. Always. Okay. They were 11-30 in the 16-17 season. They were going to have a meeting to blow the thing up. And then they literally had a phone call between Andy and Pat. Okay. So let's have a meeting, figure out what we're going to do about this. And then they won 3 straight games to get to 14-30 and decided they were not going to blow it up. They just never had the meeting. That's who they are. They don't tank. They don't pivot like that. They do give up on builds, but typically when they've given up on builds, it's been in the offseason. They gave up on the Zoe Timmy Mash PJ build with big trades in the offseason when they tried to get free agents in 2000. They ended up adding Eddie Jones, Mace, etc. Zoe got sick. The Shaq thing, that was in the offseason. They were building with the young core of Dwayne and Lamar and Karan, and then Shaq became available. They made the trade then. And then they, of course, that next offseason, they traded Eddie Jones and they brought in Walker and all that. They don't tend to do that. They've brought in players during the season. They brought in Rozier. They tried to get Lowry during the season one year. They brought in Dragic. But they don't. This would be a change for them to blow it up at the trade deadline. Okay, they've held on to players before. The only time I can remember Pat trading a player at the deadline because of a contract situation, you have to go all the way back to Ike Austin, who he traded for Brent Barry, who ended up being a disaster. Typically, he has held guys. He didn't trade Caleb last year. He didn't trade Strus when it didn't look like they were going to re-sign him. They will hold their guys. But I do think the Jimmy situation is different because he's the leader of the build. And because this situation could get a little ugly and toxic in the second half of the year if it looks like it's careening towards an opt-out. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. So I guess today I'll say this, okay? I had been leaning more towards him opting in just based on what's happened over the early part of the season. But I'm going to have to reevaluate that and maybe go back to my summer position, which is his camp has been pretty consistent that he was going to opt out. It was just a question of whether or not I was going to believe them if Jimmy is averaging 17, 18 points a game and playing only 3 out of every 4 games. Like, is that a situation where you opt out into the open market? Playback for the Cup tonight. We may do that. Let me talk to Eternal. Thanks to everybody for joining today. We appreciate it, and we'll have more on Discord, and we'll probably do a stage show today there as well. So thanks for hanging in on the second stream. Thanks to our sponsors, Ubreak. Thanks to Manny for sticking around so much this morning. I got to move on to some other things. We'll have more on this, but yeah, I guess I got to reevaluate my view of him opting in, because if this stuff is still being leaked, then that's still where his head's at. That's what it seems like to me. All right, have a good afternoon, everybody.